So this is a presentation I put together several months ago that basically covers two things. Steam albums that I grew up with as a kid, and some of these are dating back well over 50 years, along with some recordings that I have come across within the few recent years after I've gotten back into collecting vinyl albums, and some background on some of the people who made these recordings in the first place. So I think the best place to start was a quote by Howard Fogg. This was on the back of his album cover, The Talking Giants, from October of 1959, about the importance of capturing audio recordings of steam locomotives before they disappeared from regular service. In 1956, during an interview on a Denver radio station, I was asked, well, what do you miss the most now that steam engines are a thing of the past? All at once I had the answer. Their sounds, their wonderful near human sounds. This answer may sound a bit odd coming from one who has made a career out of making paintings and drawings of locomotives, but the fact remains that no paintings, mine or anyone else's, nor any photographs, even the Kindigs, Griffiths, and Steinheimers, can give me the imagery, let's try imagery, emotional impact, and nostalgic recollections inherent in an interesting sound recording of those great machines at work. So how this all started. So I'm a kid. My dad is also a rail fan. He's also in the audience. And we had a collection of LSRHA books. And my dad had a Sony console stereo system and a series of steam albums. And more often than not, we would put those albums on, and I would get one of those LSRHA books out. And I was actually looking at photos of engines that I was hearing recordings of. Because if you think about it, the photograph in some cases may not even tell quite half the story in terms of what was actually going on, and the sound bug bit for me hard. I was just telling the Nelson brothers a couple of minutes ago, I now have probably over 200 audio recordings between steam and diesel that I've collected in the last 10 years or so. So I could do a lot more programs on this. So the first pioneer for steam recording is John M. Prophet. And if you know anything about the Pennsylvania Railroad, you have probably heard of John M. Prophet III. Prophet was a resident of upstate New York, came from a fairly well-to-do family. Just wait.
We'll be blowing them out here today.
Just wait. Okay. So Prophet grew up in Mount Morris, New York. As I said, he came from a fairly well-to-do family. He moved to the Buffalo area, and although he had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Pennsylvania Railroad and was one of the co-founders of the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society, he spent almost his entire adult career working as a clerk for the New York Central in Buffalo. So in 1948, Prophet bought a Webster Chicago wire recorder, which you can see on the right. And interestingly, the technology for this actually was developed by the German military. One of these recorders was captured in Europe during the European campaign, and word got to the upper echelons of the Allied High Command, and they said, reverse engineering this thing because we need this. So after the war, it became commercially available starting in 1948, and Prophet bought one for today's equivalent of $2,100. So they were expensive. The unit itself used a human hair width wire to capture sound recording, and this would be the first available technology to capture audio in the field, as I said, starting in 1948. The thing weighed 40 pounds, so you can imagine lugging this thing around. It'd be like lugging around a sack of bricks. And at the time, it would only run on household current. So the recordings that Prophet made up until 1951, when he got a 6-volt inverter, he had to use household current. So most of his recordings were made in towers and stations. The inverter added another 100 pounds to his recording gear. So he's lugging around 140 pounds worth of equipment. He usually had a friend with him. to various spots, and the inverter created this weird hum. So he had a 50-foot cord that tied the inverter to the recorder. He would leave the inverter in the backseat of his car, and then when he was doing remote recordings, then he would take the recorder out and make his recordings. He purchased his first magnetic tape recorder in 1955. Those in and of themselves were really expensive when they first came out. You could spend upwards of in today's value, upwards of $7,000 for one of those. So Prophet had a very close working relationship with Alan Botto, who was the owner of Semaphore Records. Prophet would loan his wire recordings, and they would come either in 60-minute spools or 30-minute spools. And I actually forgot something that was kind of important. So I'm gonna point something out here quickly. Where's me? Oh. So this is a wire. So this would be the take-up spool. This thing right here would be the guide thing. And if that got off track, the speed of this thing was so fast that within a second, if it started running off track, you ended up with a rat's nest of wire in a ruined recording. So this was truly difficult field work that he did, capturing steam power both on the New York Central, Pennsylvania, and then this Western Maryland album, second from the left up there. I found out that existed a couple months ago, and I now have that in my collection. So anyway, Prophet had a very close working relationship with Alan Botto. So if you have any of these albums, the famous one, the On Time one, the vast majority of those records or those recordings were done by John Prophet. And of course, he didn't make a dime off of any of this. This was all Botto. And then Semaphore suddenly disappeared around 2015, 2016, because there was an album I was looking for, and they are no longer around. Botto would be in his 80s at this point. So he just shuttered the business. So that takes us to our first sound recording, and this is actually very rare. This is an unassisted Pennsylvania T1 climbing the east slope up through Horseshoe Curve. The vast majority of passenger trains that headed west out of Altoona had helpers. This train did not. In addition, these things did not run all that long. So from the time that Prophet got his recorder in 1948, all T1s were out of service by 1952. So this is the only known recording of an unassisted T1 running anywhere, and you can hear it. There's a distinctive sound with its poppet valves. These engines were both remarkable in some respects and remarkably flawed. One of the things that led to their early demise was excessive wear with their poppet valve gear. But then there's some reports that part of the reason that that valve gear wore out so fast, is that crews out in Indiana and Ohio, if they had a late train, were pushing these things upwards of 120 to 130 miles an hour. So they were remarkable locomotives. So here you're going to get to hear one, a pure T1. Not bad for a recording that's almost 75 years old. So our next profit recording, I first heard on the album on the left, the Standard Railroad of the World. My brother has this in album version. I've been trying to find it and with no luck. So this recording was made at XC Tower in Erie, Pennsylvania. So this is where the line, the Pennsylvania line out of the Erie docks across the New York Central Main. And so what you first hear is the helpers on a Penn Seat ore train with two of the 598 I-1Ss that they had. This recording is actually a little bit longer. There's a gentleman named Aaron Harrivan who now has Profits Recordings, and he has a Living with Steam podcast that features all of these recordings. So this one is actually an abbreviated version of this recording, the part of the recording you're going to hear here. So what you don't hear is the lead two engines go by, signal drops in front of them, and the engineer dumps the air. So now they have an ore train blocking the New York Central Main with trains coming. And so what you hear is the two helpers clear the plant, and then a recording the J1, a 464 Hudson on train number 9, Chicago Mail. Whistling, I think he's got the flagman out, whistles in flag or whistles for the signal, and then gets a high ball, and then you can hear the Hudson leave, and as the Hudson leaves, then you get to hear the I-1Ss still in the background. So you get to hear two rival steam engines on the same, or locomotives from rival railroads on the same recording. So another thing about profit, and the recording is a little bit long for me to include in this presentation, but he has got the only known recording, onboard recording of a New York Central Hudson, getting that thing up to 80 miles an hour. And boy, does that thing bark. So here's our next profit recording. This would be almost probably as rare as the one of the T1 at Horseshoe Curve. So this is one of the recording one of the 26 Central Niagaras. And he did a lot of reporting at Bayview Tower, which was west of Buffalo. And you can tell he's at a grade crossing because you can hear a car driveway after the train clears. So we got Niagara number 6024 with the train number 5, the Mohawk, at speed. The interesting thing about this one is that this locomotive is also equipped with a air horn. So it sounds like an EMD F7 coming at you until it isn't. I would estimate probably at least 60 miles an hour. Do you think that's a fair guesstimate?
Probably more like
70? We'll just say it's fast. So that leads us to our next producer, Brad Miller, who was the founder of Mobile Fidelity Records back in the late 1950s. And the more I've learned about Brad Miller, the more I've come to have quite a high regard for him. The guy was a genius. He started making recordings when he was still a teenager, and he was barely 20 years old when he founded Mobile Fidelity. And if obviously you've all been in a movie theater and you've seen the Dolby Sound insignia at the beginning, Brad Miller was behind that. Unfortunately, he died in 1998 before he reached age 60, but fortunately for us, he left quite a legacy. So these are going to be tracks from 4 albums that all of which I grew up with. The Sunday Only album is actually the only track that is a regular steam track. So we're going to get to that one. Oh, look, Mendota Tower. Oh, look, Jerry Pfeiffer photos. Where did I find those? So this is the only non-revenue track. So Miller is up in Mendota Tower, and this is one of the Q's excursions. This was on September 6, 1959. And I think this was right before the 6315 went down with mechanical issues. So Miller's up in the tower. And the interesting thing is when I did this presentation before, there was a younger member in the audience who couldn't figure out what the sounds were coming from the recording. He had never heard an Armstrong plant line before. And the thing of it is where are you going to go in this country right now and listen to somebody line an Armstrong plant or hear a tower buzzer or even a towerman talking to anybody except possibly A2 in Chicago. So this is Mendota coming west. And the other thing, if you've heard this track before, you know this, but if you haven't, notice how long it takes this train to clear the plant. That's how big this excursion was. Come on. Here we go.
Mendota coming west.
Yeah, Madonna, turn that to 6315 and the 5632 coupled west with no order.
Okay.
That's your flavor. Passage. Looking at the west end of the passing track going to west to east, but what do you got close?
Mendota, extra 6315 and 5632 coupled by at 114.
So this next track comes from an album that Miller and a partner did called The Valley de Locomotive de Vapor. Miller had gone down to Mexico in 1960, in the summer and fall of 64, right before Mexican Steam ended. This is a 2 albums that there's some incredible tracks on this album. So I picked this. This is probably the longest track in the presentation. This one is almost 5 minutes. But it captures a 282 struggling out of Huehuetoca for Mexico City. And the one thing that's peculiar about this album is I don't know if engineers were whistling literally because they knew we were being recorded, or they just did that as a matter of normal day-to-day operation. But this is also a reporting too that shows you could always tell how fast the steam engine was going by listening to it. Paul Swanson just told me he could match that whistle artistry in the 1385. He's shaking his head, but I bet he could do it. So that takes us to our last Miller reporting. So this comes from Whistling Through Dixie. And this is probably one of the strangest reportings I've ever heard. So the Mississippian was had two small consolidated. You can kind of tell by the scale of the guy standing in front of the 77, run by two brothers, James and Frank Carlisle. So what you're going to hear is the 77 leaving Amory, Mississippi, and then you're going to hear the whistle get stuck, and it stays stuck for longer than you think would be possible. You'd also tell that this steam was definitely these steam engines were definitely not superheated. Whoop. Now we're not going to listen to that one. All right, here we go. There you go. I wonder if he sent the poor dumb fireman up there with a hammer. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we had one more Miller track. So this is reporting I grew up with, along with several of the other ones. But this one has a little bit more special meaning for me. So my grandpa Nelson also had this album. And he grew up in the era of steam tractors and threshing machines. So he liked to hear big things work. And when we go down to visit, if it's raining out or whatever, put Remember When on. So I would, and we'd start listening to it. And then whenever we got to this track, he said, "Turn that up." So I turned it up. But if my mom or grandma were in the house, they would come in and say, "Would you turn that down, please?" And then usually I would, but only a little. So what you have here is a big 6. So this is a track where you're going to hear fire or the engineer calling the flag. And when Paul heard this a couple weeks ago, so there's a special whistle sequence for whether you're calling a flagman in from the south and west or the north and east, and he determined that the flagman was being called in from the north and east. So this train must have been outside of yard limits of Willard, Ohio, because otherwise there would have been no need to call out the flagman. But this is a big engine just working hard. The other thing you'll notice as the engine goes by is a very common sound during steam in this area, loose rods. Yeah, it's hard not to like the sound of steam. But that takes us to Howard Fogg, who has kind of become one of my heroes because he was truly a Renaissance man in terms of his paintings and in addition to his audio recordings. But I think the most extraordinary thing about this man was he was a fighter pilot in World War II in the European theater, and he flew P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs. He flew 76 combat missions. So by the reaction I just heard, some of you know what the casualty rates were for airmen in Europe during World War II. So that just absolutely still blows my mind. So, but to the matter at hand, so Fogg released a series of albums. I grew up with the Union Pacific one. I did not know these other ones existed until a couple of years ago. So the interesting thing about Fogg's albums is that he narrates the tracks themselves, and he's got this really cool, deep radio voice, and he's really, really enthusiastic about the track that he is narrating. So I'm just going to let those speak for themselves, and we're going to go to our first one, where he got a recording of 4011 in Bright, Colorado. And if you saw this thing when it came through the Midwest back in 2019, you know it did not work very hard because, first of all, it didn't have much of a train. And second of all, they didn't want to work it very hard. You will not hear that in this track. There's two tracks of Big Boys on this album, but this is one by far the best. The other one is one coming into Cheyenne, basically just coasting.
Once in a while, a big boy would stray southward into Denver, and on a wet, raw night in March of '57, we found Extra 4011 East, ready to roll again after a stop at Brighton for the crew to inspect the heavy tonnage ore train before entering Denver's yards. And believe me, 4011 sounded like a big boy that night, as it left town with that heavy drag tied to its tender.
So the first time I heard this next recording, my jaw just about hit the floor. I got this album a few years ago, and I know exactly where this was recorded. My daughter was actually went to Valparaiso University, so I'm just gonna. You can read the description there. I'm gonna let Fogg tell the story because the recording is almost not to be believed.
What follows now may be the most unique piece of railroad tape in our files. Come join us in the Grand Trunk Western Tower just west of Valparaiso, Indiana. It's a moonlight night, and we're about to witness a race between westbound freight trains, both hustling toward Chicago. Nickel Plate Berkshire number 758 on Time Freight 35 has challenged a paralleling Pennsylvania diesel, and we have elected to run the uncut original tape, complete with a blow-by-blow description right from the tower. Nuts to high fidelity and studio type editing. Let's have some fun, for this is exactly as it happened on that memorable night long ago.
Now we can see 35's headlight way off on the other side of Valpo.
Tower.
Pennsylvania's coming too. Westbound Pennsylvania's coming. We can see both headlights about a half a mile apart to the east of us. You'll hear the diesel and the steamer. That was the bell for the Pennsylvania entering the plant. Bear in mind that the Nickel Plate and the Pennsylvania do not cross. They do not cross. Those two railroads each cross the Grand Trunk, but parallel each other, and it looks like it might be a tie. Now I believe the Nickel Plate's coming first. You can pick up his exhaust now. Almost parallel.
So every time I listen to this, if I was a tower operator and one of those trains hit the tires, where do you go? So this takes us to our last Fogg recording. This is in Peatone, Illinois. And this is the first time I got this album, same album from the previous track. IC power, steam power. So I'll let Fogg set the scene. And you can also tell that Fogg did not like diesels in any way, shape, or form.
On a warm May morning in '55, we had our old recorder plugged in at the Peatone, Illinois station of the Illinois Central. It was quite windy, and a nasty-sounding diesel was switching some cars on house tracks across from the platform. However, a huge cloud of blowing black smoke coming north, headed for Chicago, signaled us to turn on the tape. As the train approached, a startled agent said, "Say, she's got 2 on there," and by golly, he was right. Big tough 482 number 2542 slammed by us, and 10 cars back of him was his big brother 2604, threatening to blow us off the platform as he thundered by. We don't know why he was there, but it sure was exciting.
Actually got 2 on there.
So that takes us to old Winston Link, who I'm sure most of you probably heard of. So obviously Link is famous for the photographs he took on the Norfolk and Western starting, I think, 1955. But he also made some extraordinary audio recordings starting around the same time. Many of these were recorded at night. These were released on a series of 4 albums, and Thunder on Blue Ridge was the third in the Sounds of Steam Railroading series that he produced. I don't know if any of you ever heard Winston Link talk, but you can hear him talking on a couple of these tracks. He sounds just like Groucho Marx. Partly because he was probably from the same area in Brooklyn that the Marx brothers grew up. So this next track comes from Thunder on Blue Ridge, and actually my dad's got the CD series that the Norfolk and Western Historical Society released. So this track originally was 15 minutes long, and it plays in its entirety on the CD version. I've edited this down to about 3. So what you're going to hear is an engine you probably have heard of before, the Class 82664, the 1218, and a Y6B cresting Blue Ridge. And Link called this the Great Whistle Storm, which will become evident as you hear the track. So our last track was actually recorded just a few miles from here. This comes from Steam Power along the Chicago Northwestern Railway. This album was sold in album form and CD at Mid-Continent. That's where we first came across it for years, and I think it was also sold in the Baraboo area. So this recording is actually about 8 minutes long, and it's part of it's repeated at the end on the album. So I've narrowed this down to about 3 minutes, so you can hear this is a train wildly slipping, climbing up through Devil's Lake on wet leaves in October of 1955. And then I took some of the middle part out, and then toward the end, when it seems like the engineer finally has the train in hand. I found out a couple of weeks ago from a member of the Northwestern Historical Society, the engineer on this train was notorious for just beating the holy hell out of engines. And when you hear this reporting, you will probably agree with that sentiment too. If I was the engineer on this train, I would have just I'd sent the head brakeman out, called the dispatcher and said, send a switch engine from Baraboo, we're not making it. bet fireman loves working for that guy. So if you're at all interested in finding any of this vinyl, if you go to a place called discogs.com, that's where I got the vast majority of the records that are currently in my collection. Prices aren't terribly bad, and I was able to rebuild stuff that I grew up with in addition to getting ones that I did not know about 50 some odd years ago. So thanks for your attention. That's it.